Hey, what's up, Unbroken Nation? What are the things that people can actually be doing to move towards creating that secure attachment style in their life?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is really understanding which one you are. The worst mix is for an avoidant to be with an anxious. Those are the relationships that are just super volatile and very painful and really toxic and not healthy because the anxious one always is looking for closeness, and for the avoidant one, closeness is like suffocating because they never had it, and so in their subconscious it doesn't feel safe. So even though they do want it consciously, when they get it, subconsciously they do something to create fights or push it away. So generally speaking, somebody who is very, very avoidant has a very hard time um, keeping relationships because they'll always find something wrong to basically so that they can disconnect because that's their comfort zone in the subconscious. So if you're listening and you are somebody who, goes through relationships and always feels like there's something wrong, most likely that's because you have a predominantly avoidant attachment style. And so for you, it will take a little bit more work, and I'll get into what that work looks like, than for somebody who is anxious, because there's nothing wrong with us wanting closeness, right? So the anxious one maybe wants a little bit too much closeness, but it usually gets triggered by being with an avoidant, if that makes sense. So knowing yourself and knowing what you are, if you're single, ideally, helps you recognize what people are better for you and what not. So that's as an example for me. And there's tests that you can take, free tests on the internet. um, I have 8 scores in secure, I have 7 scores in anxious, and 2 scores in avoidance. So, generally, I'm a very secure person. When I get together with somebody who's avoidant, my anxious goes through the roof, you know? So, I had to learn that for me, dating somebody who's avoidant is not a good idea. I had to learn what it looks like to be with somebody or date somebody that's secure, and this is more for the single people. In the dating process, you realize who you're with by how you feel, because the tendency with the avoidant person is that they'll start to make you feel bad, or you're starting to feel bad about yourself. And so when you start getting into, because you're wanting closeness, right? A secure person, when an anxious and a secure person come together, that the secure person can have compassion for the anxious one and say, "Hey, you're being a little clingy right now, and I know you're anxious. What do you need? I can be there for you. There's nothing wrong with you. I know that, you're struggling with anxiety." They can be a secure person can be there generally for an anxious attachment style, right? So that's why it's good for an anxious person to be with someone who is more securely attached. And so in the dating process, the how you feel with people is the most, for an anxious one, is the most important indicator, and really making quick decisions. And when you start to feel like somebody's ghosting you or putting things on you, you can be pretty sure that there's somebody with an avoidant attachment style and they're not really good for you. If you're somebody who is avoidant but wants to have closeness, you'll really have to work on communicating and allowing the other person. You'll have to learn to allow the other person that they want that closeness, and you have to learn to really be tuned into yourself and start feeling when you start feeling claustrophobic, so that you don't have to start creating fights, that you can maybe just preemptively say, I know that I have this avoidant detachment style, and I get very claustrophobic feeling like when things get too close. So maybe in the beginning, let's just spend, every other day together. So preventatively, because over time, if you get used to more connection, the the part of you that's not feeling safe with connection is going to come down. So that's this applies more to, obviously, people that are in new relationships or dating, or just getting ready to be in a relationship. If you are currently in a relationship, you're probably either on a roller coaster if you've been longer in a relationship, or kind of more like roommates, depending on what's going on. If it's, if you're not too new. And in both scenarios, the bonding based lovemaking that we're going to talk about, hopefully, helps tremendously in shifting the attachment styles, or you into the two of you, no matter what attachment styles you are, into attaching securely to each other.
And I think a big part of that is the willingness to communicate. And
Yes.
I think going back and doing one of those tests will look, I don't think any test is going to tell you everything that you need to know about yourself, especially
Yeah.
from the internet, but it gives you kind of a baseline, right? It gives you a framework to start understanding what may be true. And I'll say this, if you pop on the internet and you go do one of these tests, be fucking honest. Don't try to like game the test, right? Because it's the
Yeah.
truth, right? And people will
Yeah.
lie to themselves on the test. I'm like, why are you doing that? It's not going to help you.
Yeah.
So be honest on the test because you'll discover something. And then before we shift, because I do want to go into the bonding intimacy conversation, but I think that there is this place where before you can get there, and this is why we're having the conversation, obviously. But I think that before you can get there, you've got to be able to understand how to like navigate when you're triggering each other, right? When like you're getting in this place of like volatility because it's inevitable. Like I don't care what kind of attachment style you're in, it's gonna happen. Like that's just the human nature. And if it's not happening, then you're probably really in trouble if you're never arguing or having conflict, as I had learned in my younger days. So I'm curious, like, how do, as we're in this, so we're like, okay, we're working on attachment styles, we're understanding, we're trying to create space, we're growing, but we're triggering each other still. We're at each other's throats sometime. Like, how do you navigate that in these relationships?
Yeah, so I think I'll go back to my story because, um, that was kind of me and struggling, really struggling hard like 6, 7 years ago and being in a relationship that I thought was my soulmate and feeling so close, and then we would have these explosions, and it was just heart-wrenching, and I hadn't come across the attachment style stuff yet, but I did come across something else, and that something else is the main book on bonding-based lovemaking, and in that book, the woman's story, the woman who wrote the book, her story was so similar to mine. Relationships would start out great. She had no problems attracting guys and really falling in love and feeling like, oh, this is the one. And then within a few months or maybe a year or two, things would just totally go south. And she was just not willing to accept that that was just the way human relationships were. And so she started looking into ancient texts and neuroscience and basically discovered that we have I am going into the bonding based lovemaking because we it has to do with our nervous system and with our survival programs and with our ability to not get triggered. So, I never thought that I could be in a place where nothing phases me or nothing triggers me anymore. And um living now and being the what I know now, it is actually possible, and it has to do with our biochemistry and neurochemistry. And so what Marnia discovered is that we have two programs for lovemaking. One, the one that we know, which is based on procreation, um, orgasm, and kind of biologically, really for us to or for the species to survive. So biologically, we're programmed to not stay together. Biologically, we're programmed to essentially either get tired of each other or argue so that we move on. Um, and we don't know this, right? We don't know that we have these 2 programs, so we're just kind of staying stuck, either being on the roller coaster and getting tired of it, or getting tired of the roller coaster, but not tired of each other and just letting sex life go out the window and become like roommates. Well, the beautiful thing is there is other this other set of hormones that we can help our brain switch into. And when we do that, we become actually very, very stable and lighthearted and hear things very differently than when we're in this other paradigm. So I don't know if this is completely answering questions, but in my experience, there is actually a way to live with each other where you don't fight or argue anymore because you're just in too good of a mood basically all the time.